Well, Rick, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Lunch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
Great pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mike.
Well, we got to break bread. I don't always get to do this. I actually got to physically sit down with you. The other week, you were kind enough to drive over to my little town and spend some time together, man. And it means the world that now other people get to listen into some of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to share, and what a great time we had together. So, a great jump start to today's conversation.
Well, you've got a book out that we're going to get to here in a few minutes, but prior to the book, I think you have achieved what a lot of people are getting up and driving in the city for right now. They're chasing the American dream. They're trying to build their careers, build their lives, do something great. You've done a lot of great things that we're going to unpack while we talk today, but you had to overcome a lot to get there. And I think your book is called Stop Settling. It could be called Overcomer because really the first section of the book is about the obstacles and stuff that were in your way. You mind sharing a little bit of your story, your background of who Rick Hale is?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is when people ask that question, which comes up often when you write a book. I'm still becoming Rick Hale. It's a journey that's not over. But it was intentional to some degree as an adult as I evolved. And some of that, I think, I've heard this said that the motivation is the number one, source for doing anything significant. And then the add-on is, but the source of motivation is largely irrelevant, or, it's not the key factor. It's just having it. And I think motivation was a big deal for me growing up. And it comes from, I went to 10 schools in 12 years. My parents were not in stable relationships for many segments of my life. I moved around a lot. I've spent a year in military school and a boarding school when I was 13. At 16, I ended up in Venezuela for a full year. Going before that, my parents were divorced at 10, and it was a second divorce, unfortunately, with my mom. And she, at that point, was terminally diagnosed, with cancer, and turned out that was a false diagnosis, best I can tell, because she's still with us. But she ended
Wow.
up moving to Venezuela and kind of didn't come back. Like, she was there for 20 years. And so there's like things that in my heart as a kid, I didn't feel deserving, and I didn't feel necessarily lovable. And I really lacked a lot of self-love. And so, but at the same time, I look back at the, kind of that movie, the Lemony Snicket series of unfortunate events. And what God gifted me with was a few things: key people at the right time who
Mm.
affirmed my capacity to be a great person, or maybe, in God's eyes, I've got purpose. And the other piece of it was a natural, I think, kind of an inclination to look at the bright side of things, or find positivity, or learn from experiences versus that cycle of failure. And, as a kid growing up, moving 10 times, you learn to make friends. And so I think that might be the greatest, overlying gift, is that, every couple of years I got to start over. And part of it was I get to pick new friends, but they get to pick me as well. And I get to reinvent sort of a little of my own, personality or spin. In fact, from eighth to ninth grade, I moved from Massachusetts back to Georgia after I'd been in Georgia a few times, but I've changed my name from Ricky to Rick. And the psychology of how you label things and how you see things is how they become. There's a strong emphasis in my world about, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Mm.
And so that was sort of evidence that all of a sudden I became a much cooler version of me. Since, and, if there are Rickies out there, no offense, but I had a stigma about, Ricky, and there's a million reasons, and it's largely irrelevant other than how I saw it and what value I placed. So anyway, all that moving around, led me again to connect and learn to connect and relate with people. And a few affirmations along the way really made all the difference.
When did you begin to see that your life could be more? When did you begin to say, you know what, I don't, this has been my life, but it doesn't have to continue to be my life? When did that whole transition happen?
Well, there's two things that happened, Mike, that I think were ultra significant. One was at 10 years old, I was visiting my grandparents. By the way, when my mom went to Venezuela when I was 10, she was really just running back to her parents for security and safety and didn't have another answer. And my grandfather was part of the Pan American Health Organization as a diplomat and happened to be enjoying a stint in Venezuela, in Caracas. And so I visited that first summer after the divorce when I stayed with my adopted father. And we went to this village, a remote village in the middle of nowhere. My grandmother lost a leg, and that's in the story. And it's a run over by a train, and I'm not making it up. Escaping communism. They were in a train station in Munich, and I'll leave that for you and the reader to read. But she had severe pain and arthritic issues, and she would go to these hot springs. And we traveled down for a weekend, and again, I'm 10 years old, and they send me off. Back then, kids could just roam free. There was no concern for a couple of bolivars, which is their local currency. Go buy a grape soda and some crackers. And I'm at the pool, and it's a hot spring, natural fed pool. And these four boys, and there's two locals there, adults, or someone staying at the resort. And then they had a really small child, like under the age of 1, in a cradle or crib thing and stroller. And the four kids come running through the brush. I can hear them, and they jump into the pool in successive order, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3 pop up, and the fourth didn't. And I'm 10 years old, and I'm looking around, like, he bobbed a couple times. I heard a gasp, I heard a yell, and I looked over at the adult, and he ran to the pool as if he was going to jump in and save him. At 10, I'm expecting full well this adult's going to handle this situation, and the guy froze. And my best guess, Mike, is that he couldn't swim. And his wife screams, but no one's around. And without hesitation at that point, I just jumped in to try to do what I could. And I ended, no training. When you save a drowning victim, the first thing, don't get under him, or, I dove down, grabbed his legs, and pushed him to the surface, thinking he just needed air. And as she pulled every hair out of my head, and it was painful. It was like I was in a street fight. But the kid, we ended up saving his life. And I went back to my grandmother's cabana, and I shared it with my grandfather, who was a little dismissive and said, yeah, whatever. But my grandmother grabbed me by the face, put both hands on my face, stared me straight in the eye, and said, God loves you. He has really big plans for you. And every time I tell that story, I get emotional. And it reminds me that if some of the stories you hear or are sharing or saying don't create emotional energy, there's probably not much to it. It's just a narrative and words. And so that was the affirmation I needed at 10, that I never forgot that there is a God, and he loves me regardless of circumstance. So when you said, what are the two pivotal, that's one. The other was at 16, I found myself without a place to live again, and ended up going to Venezuela again, defaulting. And my mom had remarried, and I'm in the middle of the Andes Mountains, the most remote. As a 16-year-old, it would not be the ideal, most awesome place to be. Not a soul speaks English, and I'm at a crossroads and most people take a gap year in college and go travel or do something cool. I'm in the middle of 10th grade. I wasn't even between 10th and 11th. I'm halfway through 10th grade when I found myself without options. But in that year that I spent there, I really grew up as a human being. And it's the product of one person named Johnny, who was a traveling missionary. He had a little truck with 2 bunk beds and a projection system. And he came to our village, and we were literally in a village with dirt on the streets and strung lights like Christmas lights. They didn't have legitimate lighting for the streets. And he was interested in learning more about American culture. And so he encouraged my mom to let me travel with him. And my mom was a bit rebellious, and we weren't really hitting it off the way I wanted. So anything was better than there, was my thinking. The part she forgot to tell me, Mike, is that he didn't speak English, and I spoke 3 words of Spanish. I jump in the truck with this guy. And by the way, I didn't know it was going to be 6.5 weeks. My mom just said, hey, he'll take you around and show you, the country, and he'll bring you back. And I'm like, anywhere but here. Rebellious 16-year-old that I was. Get in the truck. I look over. I'm like, all right, so where are we going? he looks at me and goes, I'm like, oh, shucks. I'm in deep doo-doo. So anyway, I'll cut to the chase. And the reason it was I wish every kid in the world could have this 6-week just experience. One, I grew as a human because I had to adapt and adopt an attitude of positivity. The second, I was in the presence of someone that had passion and love for God and love for life differently than anyone I'd met. I'm 16. I bet he wasn't 32 or 3, but he felt 70. When you're 16, everyone's old. But he just had a wisdom about him and a commitment that I'd never seen in a human being. And as we went town to town, I recognized what real generosity and love was, because people had nothing to give because they were as poor gets. I mean, we would have dinners with families who would donate food, just feed us because we weren't carrying, it's not like a camper full of provisions. And we'd eat on an open fire, with whatever it's like stone soup of the modern era. And just a lot of love, And if we got a night in a home where they actually had a fan, I mean, it was stiflingly hot that blew on you directly. It was like a night at the Ritz, and not that I'd stayed at the Ritz, but I could only imagine. And I would want to hug that fan, like my first girlfriend. And so I learned, here's the takeaway is this: my worst day is someone's best day
Wow.
somewhere. And when
Wow.
I started framing things in life, like it just another layer, man, learning's layered. It's not linear. Just because you know it and don't, if you've not applied or used it, it's irrelevant data. It's just trivial pursuit. And so that was the biggest seed, I think, of all seeds. When I went back, I finally made it back to the States, turning 17. I just felt like I had the capacity to be having to do anything. And not that I got serious, so I don't want to mislead anybody. I grew long hair and started a rock band and decided music was my thing. And I was gonna cross over art and business. And, I spent some years trying to find myself, and at 30 got serious about real estate, which we may touch on. But yeah, it doesn't mean I unlocked the key to every door, but I unlocked the key to potential. And I lit up my subconscious brain with the idea that if I paid attention and I did the work and I evolved as a better person and learned some skills, I could do something that mattered. And
You
I
know,
want
you,
everyone to feel that.
That's exactly right, because everybody's got it in them. Everybody's got that light and that spark if they can get those doors unlocked. Your grandmother tells you God loves you. He's got a great plan for your life. You travel around for 6 weeks with a guy that you don't even speak the same language, but yet you see something in him.
Yeah.
When did God become real to you? More than just hearing a story, when did it become your story? Because I think it's a big piece of who you are and why your why is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I would honestly, the 6 weeks I spent with Johnny, and by the way, after 6 weeks, his goal, I found out later, his goal was to learn English. He was hoping that it
Wow.
would just somehow bleed over organically. And unfortunately, the opposite happened. I came back fluent in Spanish, and I'm still, I wouldn't say fluent today, it's fast forward, what, 40 years,
Yep.
42 years. But I still have the capacity to travel and speak it. And thank you, Johnny, for the 6 week crash course. But I think it was just watching it change lives on the
Mm,
road in these little towns where he would put up a few posters, open up the side of his truck, show them a really made movie about Jesus and the mission of, God's mission on earth and how Jesus is our savior. And I mean, it just started to resonate. And then as I reflect, I have to say, I think 10 was the big one. When she said God has a plan, at
mm,
that point, I started paying attention. I just knew in my heart there was something bigger than me, more capable than me, that would always present me with, win, lose, or fail, there's a purpose. And that purpose is the key word in that. So, I was baptized when I was, 11 or 12 when I came back, 13 maybe, when I came back to the States and officially made it official. But I mean, my heart was baptized in,
yep.
a few times, if you will.
That's really good. And you've alluded to this, and I think it's a big part of your story. At 30, you found the career that you've spent your life in now. So tell a little bit about how you ended up in real estate and how it started and where you are today.
Well, it was somewhat of a default career choice. I was kind of caught up again. I did go, when I say I took a 10-year turn towards music, I've never been apathetic in my approach to much of anything. I'm competitive, and I don't have to win, but I don't want to lose has kind of been my mentality. And not losing means doing the best you can with what you have. And so I even spent a year in art school at the Art Institute learning mixing, production, recording. And the problem was as I dug in and started networking into the music business, I realized they're not my tribe. And if you're in an environment that's not your tribe and they're not your people and they're not elevating and they're not inspiring and they're not lifting, you got to relocate. And so after 10 years of hunting and searching and hoping that music, because of my passion for, music in general, I had to abandon that idea and just enjoy music for the art that it is and continue. I still play guitar today and I'm in a rock band, believe it or not, at 58, and try not to lose the last of my skills before Mother Nature starts to unfold. But the important thing is finding your tribe. And
Yep.
At 30, I was working for the Journal-Constitution newspaper in their marketing department. I'd worked my way up 3 levels. I looked left and right and realized I didn't want my boss's job. I didn't want my boss's job. There's no job there I wanted. And I realized my heart was in entrepreneurship. It was in teaching, coaching, and leading and building things. And I just didn't feel that energy. And once I got clear in what I wasn't, which was there and wasn't music as a career or vocation, it got easier. And so I started looking around, and a friend came to me one day, and it was, I don't think there are accidents. I think God sends messages when you're supposed to hear it. And the question is, are your ears and heart open? But I had a friend call me, and who'd left a year earlier from the job at the Journal. He worked for me, Constitution, the newspaper. He calls me and says, "Hey man, I've been selling real estate for the last year." And he shared that he was on track for 6 figures in his first 12 months. And I did the comparison trap game of like, well, you're pretty good. I'm pretty good. Maybe that's about double what I made this year. And maybe that's a good segue career for me to save some money and figure out who I am and where I am and what I'm supposed to do next. And that led me, I'd said, okay, I'll get my real estate license. Let's try that. I knew the city really well of Atlanta. And, I ran crews and door to door and marketing for the Journal-Constitution in every major county in Georgia. And so I embarked and had the same success. It's kind of one of those things. If you can visualize yourself in a certain capacity, and then you recognize the blueprint, and then you do the work, and you've got the aptitude or skill, it's inevitable that you're going to get, if you do what they do, you'll get what they get kind of mentality. And the real surprise was I didn't jump into real estate because I thought they were my tribe. I did that to buy time, to have flexibility, to figure out who my tribe was and what I'm supposed to do. And in short order, inside of 3 years, the money was so good. It was a little bit of a trap. But an opportunity showed up to help open the very first Keller Williams office in Atlanta. And that was a trigger point and the first domino in where I am today that led me to leadership, to coaching, training, and opening offices. And I helped open that one in 1999, and then opened 3 more in 2001, 3, and 5, and then acquired 3 more. And here we are. Pinch myself, it's me. We've got 1,500 agents and doing about $3 billion in volume in the Metro Atlanta market. So but it didn't happen overnight. It was, people look at it now and are like, "Wow, I want to do what you do," or have you. It was slow and then sudden.
You do a profession. And I think we have people on this call with lots of professions. You do a profession of real estate, but there's a bigger why behind it. What is the why behind, and you talked about purpose here a second ago, what is that purpose that lies behind it that makes you get up every day, that makes it more than just selling a house and clicking it and another notch in the belt? What is that driver for Rick Hale that really gets you going?
Yeah, it's simple. It's really serving people. And for me, the fire and the fuel inside of that, like, do I love the idea of nights and weekends sitting in living rooms talking about the color of their shag carpet and that they need to, those aren't, that part of it was just the mechanical side of it. Really, the story behind the story got my blood running and my heart racing. And it was like, so where do you see your family in 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years? How can I serve you? And what I realized is that there's not many careers that put you in front of that many people if you're good at it. And if you build a strong, powerful, expanded, network. And I found myself, we're selling a few hundred houses a year with my team at one point. And that's just lives that you can touch. And what I also recognized early on is that the leverage that you get from owning businesses and winning with and through leaders, if speed of the leader, speed of the pack. And
right.
I'm only as good as the people I touch, but if I can inspire others to touch them in a similar way and come from integrity, it's not a commission-based business all of a sudden. It's a relation-based, and no commission's worth a relationship. And so I was stunned early on how relevant the conversations were that had nothing to do with real estate. They had to do with life. They had to do with how I become a better parent, father, friend. What experience does this new environment bring when I move from here X to Y? And so that was the fuel. It was really serving people. And then, my prayer with God, every time I'd open a new office that was successful, I would, of course, gratitude, I think, is fuel, and it feeds the soul. And it's an amazing thing to lean into daily. But my prayer was always, give me the wisdom and the courage to act on it. And then the realization that as I expanded, it just gave me a bigger stage to experience more people. To not only, and the cool thing is, givers get, and the more I was able to pour into people, the more the reciprocity part of that showed up. And, I grew tenfold with every conversation.
Well, your book does such a great job looking at not just where you've come from, but really how you inspire the people you work with in your teams. And I know a lot of them in your agencies. And I want to just find a couple of these that you talk about in the book. You talk about asking the right question. Um, why is the power of questions so important to to not settle in life and to get where I need to go and help other people get where they need to go?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to that statement around questioning. One is the questions you ask yourself.
Yep.
And so that's that path of self-discovery and and understanding the why. Why am I here? Not what. What is what people usually, when there's a challenge, opportunity, or an issue, it's what has to happen? What do I need to do? And and I think why is the bigger first question, and then who's the next best question,
Mm-hmm.
then what? And so I just developed that over time. But I think in terms of dealing with other people, what I've learned, and there's a book by Susan Scott called Fierce Conversations. And in her book, there's two things that stood out significantly. One is the question is the relationship, and the better the question, the better the answer. And here's the kicker: no one denies their own truth.
Mm.
And so I learned early on in sales, I first reframed it. I'm not selling anything. I'm consulting and I'm supporting. And it sometimes felt like therapy. But the better my question, the more vulnerable and authentic they'd become. And the more opportunity I have to recognize an opportunity to fill a void or support them or create or provide a resource that solved their riddle. And so the better the question, the better the answer. And it's usually three deep. It's never the first question because we all have our rhetorical narrative that
Yep.
we've had rolling in our heads, kind of that, hey, hi. And your response is, hi, how's your day going? And you have an automated, is it really? And can you describe it? And what would make it a 10 if that's an 8? Or, three or four questions later, you get the real truth. And what I've learned about the human condition is people resist anything that is pushed on them. So if I said, hey, Mike, you need to, all of a sudden these defensive blockers are going to pop up and you're going to probably defend where you are or what you're doing. And, that's just human. But if I say, hey, Mike, what do you think about and have you thought of and what would happen if, and does that land where you want? And all of a sudden, three or four layers deep, you come up with your own answer, which is probably in your head and heart already. But now it's an empowered position when it's your idea.
That's
So
really
that was kind of a long explanation of how questions can serve you. And it's really about someone owning their truth and not you forcing it upon them. And there's a whole nother conversation around judgment and resistance to judgment that, asking questions eliminates.
it's the power of the question. And who's the best you've ever met at it? Who's the best leader you've ever worked with or for that you went, dude, they got the question thing right. And every time I'm with them, I want to go get from them, but yet they end up asking me a million questions. I never get anything out of them because they're always asking me something about me. Who's the best you've ever seen at that?
That's a great question to ask me. There are so many people in my world. I'm almost resistant to share because I'll
Yeah.
probably hurt someone's feelings somewhere because they're in our tribe at Keller Williams is all about, asking better questions and about
Mm,
collaboration. So
good,
it's in the water.
good.
We sprinkle that, that's how we flavor the water. Bob Kalinsky, I'll say, was probably really influential, not probably, was really influential early on in my career. He was the regional director. He encouraged and invited me to the opportunity of owning an office. I was in my early 30s. I'm not sure I looked in the mirror and saw in my head and heart, I wanted to be a business owner, but I don't know. I needed third party affirmation, and he
Yep.
was that guy. And he was he was really good at it. Another good friend of mine, Sean Rawls, is a phenomenal thought leader and thinking up, he wrote a book, F It Less, which interesting title, but
Yeah.
the idea is to care more. And he's great at posing good questions too. And here's the thing, there's lifters and leaners in life. And I think the lifters are the ones that after a conversation with them, you walk away feeling like a better human being because of what you're able to absorb in the conversation, but also you had capacity to contribute. That's a win-win, anytime and every day. And then there's leaners, who are people who show up with it's not necessarily the proverbial handout, but it's their energy is just, it's not reciprocal and fulfilling. And so I'd say, when you say who's great at asking questions, usually they're the lifters,
That's
because
right.
lifters don't lift without knowing or interrogating reality and finding opportunities to lift you up.
Yeah, they don't do everybody the same. They
You
totally
can't.
no.
It's kind of like, the 4 love languages or 5 love
Yep.
languages. Sorry.
No, you're
Everyone has
exactly right.
their language, and they're in a different place. One of the things I taught often is, if you're going to coach people, you have to meet them where they are. You can't just project out, because it's a different language as you evolve and you move up the ladder, of life.
You talk about people that don't settle and the importance of how they start their day. When you
Mm.
think about life, how important for Rick is how the day begins? How important is that to getting the most out of that day?
Yeah. So thanks for asking. There's a book called The Miracle Morning. It was written by Hal Elrod, Elrod. And I've met Hal on a couple of occasions, and he was on my podcast at one point. It was great. And what I love about his book is he gives you a simple formula. And he escaped a near-death experience and realized that time and life is finite,
Mm.
and that every day deserves all you've got. I sit in a unique place today, Mike, where I've created this margin by replacing myself in my active role. People call it retired. I'd like to think of it as rewired. And, my prayer is, God, I've created this open canvas, help me paint it. I'm not locked into a job anymore. But what I love about what Hal did, and I use this regularly, is that he's got an acronym called SAVERS, and S is silence. The A is for affirmation. The V is for visualization. The E is for exercise. The R is for reading. And the S is for scribing. And I'm not successful every day, but inside of every week, I apply those letters, or that acronym, to my life. And I think by creating sacred space for, how you think, how you pray, how you meditate, again, what you focus on expands. Visualizations are vital. If you can't see it, you're not going to spot it and move towards it. And then, exercise, and, one thing you can't get back is health, once that's gone. And part of the context of the book was an operations manual to project out 5 years from now, as opposed to 1 year increments. And really, what does it look like really down the road, so that your 1 year goals stacked 5 times don't lead you to a rhetorical, not a rhetorical, but a repetitive response. Like, you're on a wheel that just, you end up landing in the same spot. And so what does the bigger picture look like? And using that savers as a guide each day, you write a little bit, post your thoughts, record, send it back to your subconscious brain, visualize what the best ideal outcome, and then spend time praying and meditating. I mean, it's hard to have bad days.
When you sit there at 58 and you project out 5 years, what scares you? What scares you about looking at 5 now rather than when you were 45 looking at 50?
Yeah.
What are the things you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm excited about this part of it? What would you say?
It's that prayer back to, it's a prayer. I think Andy Stanley planted the seed years ago. God, give me the wisdom and the courage to act on it. I think we all carry, Mike, infinite wisdom. We just default on that wisdom often. And I'm included, man. But my prayer, go back 3.5 years ago, when I, started working on the book in sincere fashion. I really took it to heart, and I replaced myself in my active role as the operating partner of all the franchises. And we had 8 locations. I created this margin, and my prayer was, God, if I do this, and I don't know anybody that makes deals with God, but I chuckle at myself that it almost looked like I was trying to, board game this, of like,
Yeah.
will you please share with me what I'm supposed to do? Like, we create this margin in time. I don't want to squander it. Someone said this the other day to me. They said, yeah, I don't want to show up at the gates of heaven well rested. And I'm like, oh, you're killing me.
Well
I
done.
finally
Well
earned the
said.
right to wake up and fish a couple of days a week. And now I'm plagued by this thought that maybe I'm too rested. So what scares me is that the opportunity shows up, and, am I ready for it? And who am I to define the stage? I've written one book, I've got ideas for another one, but we'll see if it evolves. I'm happy in the moment. It's been right at a year since we published it. And to really market and move a book, you've got to find a bigger stage, bigger platform, more, you've got to travel, or at least
Yep.
that's what they tell me. And, and I'm trying to, so this is another leadership moment where you look in the mirror and go, but do I have to? What's the paradigm for impact without physical, Zoom and the COVID thing kind of proved this. We're having an incredible conversation and we're, hour and a half away from each other. We could be 100 hours apart. It
Yep.
wouldn't matter. We could still, and it, so I'm learning as I go how technology and resources, but what scares me the most is just the calling. And
Yeah.
it doesn't scare me in the sense that, well, maybe it does, uncertainty is real. It's a human experience. What if I'm called to something, that truly puts my life in danger, or all the things that I think I've worked for and the freedom and time to invest more with family and friends. And that's, that margin, man, my stress level is better than it's ever been. My sleep's better than it's ever been. It's because I did the work.
That's right.
Would I
That's
have to
right.
go back to work?
That's exactly. Well, I know I heard Zig Ziglar say years ago, you don't ever pay the price, you reap the benefits. He said you pay the price when you don't do the work. You reap the benefits when you do. You're not paying the price, you're reaping the benefits of it. And
That's
you're in
right.
that reaping the benefit season. Now it's okay, Lord, what do you want me to do with it? You said something in the book. You talked about a whole heart. And I loved your definition of it. When your outside behavior aligns with your inside voice, then
Yeah.
you have a whole heart. How is it hard to keep a whole heart in the business world that you've been in and in the world that we live in?
I mean, well, integrity. So I'll take it one step further. I think integrity, in the way I define it, is when your inside voice and your outside behavior are aligned. And I think the human experience is that it could be one of two things. We all have that, that discerning, negative, uncertain side voice inside saying, you can't do this. You don't deserve this. Why would you have that? Why would you earn that? Why would you experience that? It goes on and on. And
Yep.
then there's the voice inside that says, if you're spiritual, it's because I'm, born of something greater, and that I'm here to, I was born great and now I'm just experiencing that journey. And so it, it it's an interesting reality when your inside voice says you're something, the outside behavior doesn't align. And I think that's kind of there's an element of acidic corrosion that goes on that hurt. Like there's a pain point there. But if you listen and you lean, I think that's where the gift lives, is when you actually, goes back to the courage to act on that wisdom.
That's right.
The wisdom is that inner brilliance. The courage is where it shows up in the real world. And I think the payoff is when you recognize you've become a better person because of that journey back to Zig and doing the work. But you've also left some DNA and you've connected with people that needed you at the right moment, that you made available, and that you were there with a whole heart.
You really encourage leaders to really understand themselves. And you spend a lot of time in the book talking about DISC, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, all those different tools. Why is it so important for a leader who doesn't want to settle to understand how God put them together and how God hardwired them?
I mean, the simple answer is you're the umbrella for the organization to shield it from external forces that are detrimental. You're the hope. There's a saying, speed of the leader, speed of the pack. And, one of the reasons I stay a voracious learner is that I've look in the mirror and go, you can't give away what you don't have. You can't
Mm,
share an experience you've not had. I think integrity is also knowing that you're not espousing wisdom having not lived it. I think there's an authentic energy that shows up when you go, hey, look, I know exactly how you feel. I know exactly where you're coming from. How do you see me serving you best? So if I can twist that again into a question, but if and sometimes it goes back to the trauma of overcoming things, and I almost think you have to have that trauma to be ultra relatable to people who've experienced anything close to it, because they're not going to buy it, they're not going to feel it, they're not going to sense, you're up in the, you're talking down to me, so to speak, as opposed to peer to peer, with a sincere open heart. So not sure that fully answered the question, but as a leader, I think there's two phases. One, you can't give what you don't have, which means you should be on a journey to self-discover your best version and then share that journey. The
mm.
other is being sincere and authentic about the things that aren't perfect and that are flawed. And I think no one wants perfection. It's a boring conversation. And I think once you've achieved it, I think you immediately realize it's no longer perfect because nothing's perfect on earth as a human being. And so it's a journey. And I think being authentic, open, and saying, hey, I used to share this early on in my real estate career. It just popped into my head. I would promise people they would get all of me, and I would give
Mm.
sincere effort to every step of the way in the pursuit of, buying, selling, or investing real estate. And I said, but here's what I know. One, I'm going to be really clear in what I know. I'm really clear in what I don't know. And I promise you, I won't confuse the two to make you think that I'm better than I am. But what I know is that I have an incredible resourceful spirit to find the expert to solve any problem. And people in early on, when I didn't, and when I tell you I didn't, we all started in real estate. Your first house, you know how to pass the test. You
Yeah.
don't really know how to navigate the complexities, the uncertainties, and the nuances of a transaction.
What do you do
So
now? What do you do now when doubts set in? What do you do now when you look in the mirror and you're like, can I reinvent myself for this new season? Do I have what it takes for what's next? How do you handle doubts, and how do you coach leaders in handling their own doubts of themselves?
the first steps to get clear in the why. Why is this important to me? If you're not clear in why is fuel for everything, every mountain you've ever climbed, there has to be a why attached that's really going to pull you up when you're down and keep the light shining on the goal and the idea of that better version of you that shows up on the other side of the mountain. Um, when I have doubt, though, the simple answer, Mike, is I go find a role model, a coach, someone who's done it or doing it. And then I sit down and I try to break down, is it my skill set? Is it my approach? Is it the blueprint I'm operating with? And is it something I'm supposed to pursue? So sometimes I think we subconsciously derail from things that we think we want because someone made it look sexy or cool, or, we make up this story. And, that goes back to one of the things I spend time in the book too, explaining, hey, there's 12 categories of life
Yep.
that I think if you collectively stack those, you're going to wake up incredibly loving of yourself and you're not going to have regrets. But the better question is not what checkbox helps you feel fulfilled in that category. It's like, did you fulfill the intention of that goal?
Mm.
We've
Mm.
all had goals, but if you're not clear in the intention or purpose behind the goal, you're going to derail. Something's going to get in the way, and you're going to allow that default to happen because your heart wasn't all in, and it goes back to the why.
That's really
So
good.
get clear on what you're chasing, and then find someone who's done it. And then sometimes it's accountability. It's just get up a little earlier, stay a little later on occasion, and live in that counterbalance state of some things take a little extra effort. You don't, if doing what you're doing is getting what you're getting and it's not satisfactory, you can't keep doing it and expect a different result.
That's right. Well, you even use the book, quote in the book, one of the very worst uses of time is to do something very well that need not be done at all. And there you wasted all this time and it wasn't even your gifting or it wasn't needed. How do you keep yourself now at this stage of life? You are what everybody would say is a success, quote unquote, in our world that we live in. How do you keep yourself from doing stuff that doesn't matter? How do you keep yourself from doing something you're just plowing a field nobody wants to buy from? How do you stay fresh in that?
Well, so one way I do it is through calendaring and making sure that I stage the experience I want. Because if you don't, the world will dictate how your time goes. Like if you just open, especially if you live in a highly networked, successful, and like if you're in an environment where there's lots of opportunity for others to use or benefit from you, you can't say yes to everything.
Yep.
So part of it is making sure the things I say yes to that are most important land in my day planner and they're non-negotiable appointments with that endeavor. I also consistently focus on Pareto's law. It's something I learned early on. It's called the 80-20 principle. And it basically speaks to 20% of all things that you do will create 80% of the outcome. But 100% of the things you could do are all available. And it goes back to doing things that are either, irrelevant, unnecessary, outsourceable, subcontractable. Like someone else could do that and it would be fine. It doesn't have to be me. But if I get clear on what my 20% is and I focus my energy there and obtain 80% of the outcome, the rest is okay. Like no one's 100% all the time. And so that's part of it is prioritizing and making sure that my calendar reflects it. When people are struggling in life and they're struggling in business, first question is, would you mind revealing or sharing your day planner? What does it look like?
Mm.
And success or failure lives right there. It's, where you put your energy is what you're getting out of life, and the priority treatment. It goes back to first and last. You asked about that too. When you wake up supercharged, you can probably nail 90% of everything you're after before lunchtime if you're hyper focused and make it your priority. And then the rest of the day will take care of itself.
You talk in the book about Gary Keller and his four different types of energies. And you spend some time in the book unpacking the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, and the business energy. Why is it so important? And I love that. I'd not heard it categorized that way. Why is it so important to manage those energies well? And why are those four such great categories that Keller laid out?
I mean, if, as a collective, it kind of fills every bucket. I've
Yep.
got 12 categories in this. I created this wheel of life. And I think it just encompasses all things to create a successful, mission or, perspective. And then when you do the work in each of those four categories and you make sure that there's time and space every day, there's just not a lot of room for waking up regretful, and thinking you missed something. I mean, you've got to fund a life. I believe the purpose of a job is to fund the perfect life.
Mm.
Like that's if you're in a job. If you can overlay that with something you're really excited, passionate about, and your tribe resonates, it's a 10x, and that's the real goal. But at the end of the day, if you have to do what you do because it's something that's, that feeds your family, that's great. Just make sure that you're paying attention to the other three categories and that you're not operating in a dysfunctional or disproportionate way. Because again, that's what regret is when you're really good at one spoke in the wheel or a few, and then you neglect a few. And then one day, some things can't be won back. It's relationships, health. There's at some point you're not going to be able to travel and do cool adventures, so you better, my opinion is, build it into the plan now.
Your wheel of life is so good, and it's really sort of the centric piece of the book. How much do you have to revisit that personally? You wrote it, you came up with it. How much do you have to keep going back to it to make sure you're staying strong and rating yourself strong in each of those categories?
It's almost daily. I mean, I didn't grab this just to impress you that it's on my desk. Like I have copies of this sucker everywhere. And what's cool about it is, and I use the analogy of GPS in the book. You can't, if you're traveling somewhere and you're not clear where you are when you plug it into your global positioning system, whatever your Waze or Google Maps, if it doesn't know where you are, it can't help you get where you want to go. And so what I use this as is like almost like going into the doctor and get all the vitals. These are all the gauges on my dashboard, if you will. And if one's, you can let one slide for a while, but this in a car, man. If you run low on, air in a tire, it's only a matter of time before something goes wrong, or water in your radiator. And so you got to pay attention. But I use it almost daily. Like am I perfect? No, not even close. But every time I look at it and it triggers a thought, when I'm A game, which is, this is a practice skill, I immediately go to my day planner and try to set an appointment. I don't try, I do. I set an appointment. And if I don't know how, maybe the appointment is figure out how to improve this. And it could be a who, reach into my database or my flip through who can help me solve this riddle. And by setting sacred time aside, you don't wake up 5 years from now going, I'm not sure what happened, but here I am. And, for a lot of us, that happens, and it's the wish I, had or glad I did. I try to lean into the glad I dids as often as possible.
That's good. This book is so good. And I hope people will have a link in the show notes where they can order their copies. It's great. It's just helpful for a young guy entering a career, young lady entering career. It's great for people in the mid parts of their career and at the end of their career. You even talk at the end about wealth, and you talked about having the capacity to make key choices without fear of disrupting your life plan stability or well-being. What do you think is the purpose of a person understanding why God has blessed them the way that he has? Which I think wealth is what wealth is. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, wealth gives you choices. I mean, when I don't, I know lots of people with wealth who are miserable and
Yep.
uncertain about lots of things. And I think if you're grounded in faith and you believe there's purpose, it's literal currency, but it's also capacity rich currency, like different than, and my thoughts on, I still like material things. Like, I mean, I drive a cool truck. I like it. I do. And I'm not ashamed of it. But if the day I wake up and realize it's not serving that inner soul that needs feeding daily, then I'll find something else, and today, here's the litmus today, which I absolutely have grown into, is that I'll invest in really nice things if it creates an experience or opportunity for others to benefit.
Mm.
And then it feels good. Like it really feels good. We put in a pickleball court, which, I'm not, no bragging. It just, had the capacity,
Yep.
but the reason I want family and friends more excited than ever to come visit.
Yeah.
And so it's experiential. And those are the things that I think, by building a platform that one day gives you, opportunity and to express with cool things, that's great. I think there is an underbelly of benefit that takes away some of that fear and uncertain. Like, I don't wake up scared about financial matters, which frees up my mind to think of other things that are more positive and productive. And that's, possibly that's part of my personality. Like, I naturally have a little bit of anxiety and uncertainty. Like, I'm an A type. I got to be
Yep.
climbing something. And I think God's teaching me in this season to take a deep breath, be more generous, be more available, because as important as the benefits of financial generosity, I think time is the greatest
Yep.
gift, and being a part of something bigger. And I'm searching for that now. And I've got some ideas and thoughts, and I'm building my network, and I'm, praying for it, and it's coming.
Well, I'm incredibly thankful God connected our paths, and incredibly thankful to that I got to read the book and to spend some time with you. Final question today, Rick.
Yeah.
The Bible says in the book of Acts, David served his purpose in his generation and then he fell asleep. It's a great line that
That's
encompasses a
awesome.
whole guy's life. What do
Yeah.
you think was the purpose God created Rick Hale for? Brought him through a crazy childhood, incredible experiences that shaped him, finding his calling in his career. Why do you think God put you here? What would you say?
Yeah. I guess in the simplest of terms is to be a light and to help others see things in them that maybe they don't naturally see. Because, back to the earlier stories, I had a couple of people at key moments affirm who I am as a person and my capacity, and also reinforce the idea that God loves me regardless, and that there's a reason and a season for everything. And I think my purpose is just to be a mirror, if you will, and
Mhm.
allow people to see that brilliance and that amazingness that exists in them that hasn't been discovered yet. And so my hope and prayer, if anyone's listening, is that I want to connect with young people who are, maybe lean on the more at risk side, of life, that don't wake up, privileged. But at the same time, there are a lot of privileged kids who really need affirmation, maybe more than even just like
Mhm.
when you walk in the shadow of some, your parents who have done amazing things, man, it's a scary reality to think that you're going to have to show up and stack up. And so I think affirming that you have what it takes is part of that story and experience that I think I bring with that, back to the authentic side of having lived some of that. And then just, I think my purpose is to illustrate how growth never stops, and opportunity to share and boost others. And, my goal in life is to be a lifter, not
Mm.
a leaner. And I want to add more than I take and give more than I receive. And if I do that, I think I can lay my head down fulfilled, knowing that, I've taken care of anyone that crossed my path in positive ways.